All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a massive, undeniable economic shift that's happening right under our feet. And more importantly, we're going to unpack two radically different technological escape routes being built in response to it. On one side, we have what some call the billionaire-backed network state, and on the exact opposite side, a fiercely independent, citizen-led movement. Let's get into it. We're starting off with a pretty stark warning from our source material. This comes directly from former financial trader turned inequality economist Gary Stevenson. He's basically arguing that our current economic trajectory is aggressively hollowing out the middle and working classes. His analysis points to the systemic wealth transfer, where ordinary people and even governments are losing their grip on assets, while vast fortunes just keep accumulating at the very top. And the math behind this shift? It's honestly staggering. Stevenson points out that in the UK, for example, government wealth has plummeted from plus 100% of GDP all the way down to negative 100% over the last 40 years. Think about that for a second. This isn't just a political talking point, it's a mathematical reality of shrinking public resources. And, when public resources shrink, the social safety net phrase, which leads everyday citizens to ask a very logical question: what exactly is the backup plan? Well, proponents of this view suggest that we are essentially caught in a wealth pump. As unchecked inequality creates a ticking clock, traditional nation-states are really struggling to provide the basic infrastructure of a good life for their citizens. Because of that immense pressure, people across the spectrum are increasingly looking for an exit strategy. This economic reality is literally forcing a search for alternative systems, and it's leading us right to a major fork in the road of our digital future. So, what does this fork in the road look like? We're seeing two totally diverging paths to escape this hollowing out. Path A is the corporate and elite-backed network state. Path B is the citizen-powered, localized Leafdom, which is also known as network sovereignty. These two models represent completely different philosophies on how to rebuild society and governance using modern tech. Let's break down the first one. The network state concept is heavily championed by tech investor Balaji Srinivasan, and it totally flips the traditional idea of a country upside down. Instead of starting with land and putting people on it, it starts in the cloud. It is a highly aligned online community, often organized around a specific moral innovation and its own cryptocurrency, that gathers digital citizens first. Only later do they crowdfund and buy up scattered physical land, with the ultimate goal of gaining diplomatic recognition. The idea here is that these new network jurisdictions would compete for citizens exactly like startups compete in a free market. They'd be judged on two main axes: strong versus weak vision and strong versus weak execution. If a network state provides efficient services, a great community, and a compelling vision, boom, it attracts capital and citizens. But critics are quick to point out a potential dark side to this heavily financialized model. And this brings us to the crux of the clash between the two models. While the network state offers high efficiency, critics argue it risks becoming a centralized cloud empire, largely driven by market forces and elite founders who extract rent from digital citizens. On the exact opposite side, we have network sovereignty. This model relies entirely on decentralized, local empowerment, treating the digital ecosystem as a shared commons rather than a corporation. This is the Leafdom. Those pushing for the Leafdom model argue that we first have to wake up to what they call the illusion of decentralization. Right now, they claim tech giants use something called interface inversion. Basically, the platform sits right between you and your computing power. You just become a digital tenant, renting space in their massive centralized ecosystem. They actually call this royalist compute, where your private data and logic are treated like the taxable property of a digital monarch. Crazy, right? Conversely, the localized Leafdom completely tears that structure down. It treats you as a sovereign participant in a decentralized forest. Instead of piping your data up to some corporate cloud, you use leaf node logistics. This means running localized execution at the extreme edges of the network, relying on the physical, tangible hardware sitting right there on your desk. They term this Republican compute. In this setup, you, the citizen, hold the absolute unbreakable deed to your digital life. Okay, so how do you actually build one of these things in practice? Everyday citizens are using this fascinating concept called chopsticks engineering. These are lightweight, surgical maneuvers to reclaim autonomy in 3 really simple steps. First, you secure the physical substrate. You literally buy and own your hardware. Second, you publish your unalterable intent, creating a mathematical record of your mission. And third, you execute locally. You completely bypass those corporate cloud APIs altogether. But wait, how do you manage the digital truth of a Leafdom without relying on a centralized cloud server? Well, the sources point to something called ERC 7827. Think of it as a pragmatic,
quiet revolution in smart contracts. Without getting too bogged down in the code, it basically brings highly efficient, single-entry bookkeeping directly to the blockchain. It creates this flawless mathematical record of every change you make, but without the bloated fees we usually see in traditional smart contracts. To make this possible, there has to be a fundamental shift in how we store data, moving from heavy first-in, first-out histories to a strict last-in, first-out structure. See, first-in, first-out requires scanning massive, expensive transaction histories just to find the current truth. Last-in, first-out, on the other hand, instantly reveals if a digital promise is open or closed just by querying the very newest entry. The sources beautifully compare this to an ancient tamper-proof clay seal. It gives you immediate, undeniable proof of state. Now, obviously, for a leafdom to interact with reality, it needs real legal standing and actual human effort. So before any action happens, a protocol called the Kali wrapper legally defines the real-world entity right inside the smart contract. Then, a system called kernel sign verifies the actual human effort expended out at the leaf node. The documents brilliantly call this cryptographic proof the human record of sweat, anchoring abstract code directly to real human labor. Which brings us to this really critical concept called the semiotic bridge. As we start integrating AI into these leafdoms, the sources remind us that AI agents are really just deterministic scripters. The messy, fluid intent, that comes from you, the human pilot. The AI just executes the rigid mechanics. Crossing that massive gap between fluid human thought and exact machine logic requires a completely flawless translation layer. To cross that bridge safely, though, Leafdom advocates say we literally have to ditch the modern graphical user interface. They describe the modern GUI as this point-and-grunt dead end, just fragile visual bloat that reduces us to chimps pushing colorful buttons for a dopamine hit. Instead, they champion the agentic typewriter. By returning to pure explicit text and the command line interface, you engage with unmediated reality. It's a lossless, exact translation of your intent straight into machine logic. And finally, this entire flow physically culminates in devices like the CheerBot. This is where the abstract digital world physically hits your living room. The root data is anchored on-chain via LIFO. The intent flows through unbreakable text channels. The CheerBot leaf node reads those verified state changes and instantly translates that logic into real-world electrical actions using GPIO pins, the physical electrical connections sitting right on your desk. It is the absolute realization of citizen sovereignty. So, wrapping up this explainer, we can see the technological escape routes from Gary Stevenson's economic warnings are literally being built right now. The tools for true digital independence, completely away from the corporate cloud and the billionaire network states, are already here. Which leaves us with one vital, provocative question to think about. Will you remain a caged digital tenant in a cloud empire, or will you grasp the tools of sovereignty and become the pilot of your own digital future? The choice is entirely yours. Thanks for joining me, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.